And I can't help but feel like Georgia from last year to this year is just going to be a different beast. And I think it's important we have this conversation because I think nationally there's this thought that, okay, we kind of know who Georgia is. We kind of know what that team's going to be because Carson Beck is back. We saw him play last year. Kirby Smart, we know who he is as a head coach. Mike Bobo, the same OC. Glenn Schumann, the same DC. You know, you sprinkle in some new pieces on that staff, but for the most part, we kind of know what to expect from Georgia, right? Maybe, but I think the context within Georgia overall needs some more attention. Like, I think Georgia's offense could be better than last year. And that sounds funny to say out loud because last year they scored almost 40 points a game. I wouldn't be surprised if they were even more dynamic. Now, I don't know if that points per game number will be higher, but I just look at this roster and, like, they didn't turn Carson Beck loose, per Kirby Smart, really until the end of last year. Like, for the most part, they were kind of trying to ease him into it. It's his first time being a starting quarterback, a lot of big stages in the SEC, you know, kind of let him walk before he runs. But when Carson Beck was running, we saw what he's capable of doing. Against Kentucky, he threw for almost 400 yards. Like, there was not a moment last year where I looked at Carson Beck and said, yep, the stage is just too big for him. Even in the game against Alabama, did he have his best game of his career? No, but I thought he did more than enough to put them in position to win that game. Didn't happen, you call it what it is. But, like, overall, Georgia, with Carson Beck getting another year in the system to build off of last year, where he completed 70% of his passes. You give him another year with the same OC. Like, last year, I don't think you just copy and paste it this year. I think you copy and paste it and build upon it. That's scary now. That's scary. Like, Georgia could very well be an offensive-led football team. And I understand now you don't have the avatar that number 19 was playing for Georgia last year, that was the tight end, that was Brock Bowers, that was arguably the best player in college football regardless of position. But at the same time, you didn't have him for a lot of last year. You definitely didn't have him for a lot of last year where he was 100% healthy. He gets dinged up against Vandy, and you're kind of trying to acclimate your offense to life without Brock Bowers. I look at the skill level across the board for Georgia on the offensive side of the ball. And no, you don't have the avatar that is Brock Bowers. But you still have, I think, a really high level of skill players from Dylan Bell to Colby Young to Trevor Etienne. Like, the skill, I think the floor for the skilled players in Athens is higher than it was last season. You don't have Brock Bowers. I've said that multiple times, but still, I think that overall it's fair to expect that they can be every bit as dynamic, if not more dynamic, with all the weapons that Carson Beck has to choose from. Dominic Levitt, I didn't even mention him. Ra Thomas. Like, we could keep going here. The buzz that we heard during spring football, I would pay really close attention to, because there's always going to be different talking points that pop up once during a spring camp. But the talking points that we heard routinely pop up in Athens during Georgia spring ball was two things. One, the skill players. I just mentioned that. Second, the offensive line. Now, the offensive line at Georgia has been a staple of who they are, really since Kirby Smart has gotten there, in my opinion. But for them to be a talking point during spring football and say, yeah, hey, we feel good about them. Hey, we're in a really good place. Hey, I think we could be even better than we were last year, is kind of the feeling I get from them. That's dangerous. Like, that means something that you're hearing that as much, because last year Georgia was top 10 in the country in terms of yards per carry as a team. So to build on that, based on the buzz, they're going to be able to be super dynamic with Carson Beck throwing the ball to all these weapons, and then be able to pound the rock with Roderick Robinson, Trevor Etienne, that big offensive line. Like, I don't know how you defend Georgia offensively is what I want to make sure we get to here. Talked to Jake Rowe yesterday from Dogs HQ. He has a segment coming out on the On3 Roundtable YouTube channel, so subscribe to that. We got to talking, and he hit on something that we've mentioned on this show a couple of times. This year for Georgia, there's no fighting complacency. Another reason why I think Georgia is different this year compared to last year. Last year, they're saying, all right, how does Kirby Smart get his guys going? How does he find some motivation for them after they've won 2 national championships in a row? Georgia's not coming off the mountaintop in 2024. Georgia is finding a way to get back to the top of the SEC and finding a way to get back on top of the college football world. The fact that there's not that complacency built in, Jake Rowe said it perfectly, that's like organic fertilizer to make this whole thing grow. We have not seen, I don't believe, a coach outside of Nick Saban that is as good as Kirby Smart at putting a mission in front of his team and allowing them to play their best football. We saw it multiple times last year. After Auburn, Georgia went on a tear. After Alabama, I understand Florida State, they were nowhere near full strength. Georgia was still very much so clearly on a mission in that game. I think those two situations are microcosms of the mindset Georgia has heading into 2024. They are on a mission. They understand they don't have the crown right now. They understand they're not at the top of the college football world right now. And Kirby Smart is using that to his advantage and causing that to be kind of the fuel for this team when it comes to this upcoming season. Because there is some questions around Georgia. And I think the major questions most folks have is, okay, well, they lose a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think anybody's going so far as to question if they're going to be good on defense. But they do look at that defense and say, okay, well, you only bring back right around half of that production from last year's team. I think questioning Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann and their defense or having any kind of uncertainty about them from the outside looking in is a lot like questioning a grill master's ribs. Like that's what they do. Like Kirby Smart, yes, he is going to have a solid offensive unit. We've seen that now for a couple of different years. But Kirby Smart is from the defensive side of the ball. That's what he's come up doing. That's what he played as a player. He is going to make sure that that side of the ball is on their P's and Q's all the way through the line. The path for Georgia in 2024 is different than previous seasons. There's no way around that. Schedule changes a little bit with the new SEC, and they got to go to Texas. But, I really believe that this path in 2024 forward for Georgia favors the Dogs. You look at what they have in terms of their toughest games. Yes, they got to go to Bama at the end of September. They go to Texas October 19th. But from November forward, yes, you got to play Ole Miss, but, their two toughest games, in my opinion, hit during or before, that midway point during the season. I suppose Texas is the 7th game they play, I believe, if I'm not off on that. A little bit past halfway point, might not be game 7. They can lose both those games, just so we're on the same page. Go 10-2, make the college football playoff. Let's roll. The other part of this, too, the fact they could lose a game and still make the college football playoff. They have a little bit of a get-right opportunity for themselves if they drop a game. That's something that didn't exist previously for Georgia. Last year's a great example. You go undefeated during the regular season. You lose to Bama in the SEC title game. You missed the college football playoff. You had zero margin for error. That was obvious. Now, with that being said, this upcoming season, Georgia can drop a game, and Georgia losing a game, I've said this many times, they treat losing a game a lot like smelling salts. Some teams, they lose a game and they get a little bit down on themselves. It breaks apart in the locker room. They start to question themselves. Georgia loses a game, and it's whoa, we're awake. Okay, we're up, we're rolling. That is Georgia, and that's who they're going to be in 2024. So going back to this path, toughest games are early, have a chance to get right. Let's just say Georgia goes to Atlanta, and let's say they somehow lose the SEC championship game, and they have to play in the first round of the college football playoff. They have 2 weeks to, one, get healthy, most importantly, and second, prepare. Put together a game plan. Kirby Smart gets in the lab with his staff. Usually you give Kirby extended time to prepare for your team. That's not good for the other team. And that's just assuming that they end up having the least amount of time to prepare. Let's go ahead and say Georgia wins the SEC. They won't play a game for 3 to 3.5 weeks. Let's say they miss the SEC title game overall and they have to play in round 1. Well, then they'll be done by November and be playing again at the end of December. See what I'm saying here? The fact that Georgia has so much time to reset from the regular season or the SEC title game, any way you slice it, nobody wants to see Georgia in a 12-team playoff. They're too deep. They prepare too well. They're too well coached. They have too much talent. All these things in my mind stack up to where I'm man, if you're going to take down Georgia, it's going to have to be the perfect matchups, the perfect storm. Have to have the perfect game plan. So all these things, I'm not saying that Georgia's going to win the national championship right now at least because we're sitting here in May and that would be irresponsible for us to do. But Georgia is just a different beast than they were previously. We're sounding the alarm. It feels like every week or so when it comes to talking about Georgia on this show. We are calling our shot. Georgia is going to be different than they have been in previous years. This path for them is different than it has been in previous years, and that favors them in a massive, massive way. Right now, they're the best team in college football for my money. We're going to do our post-spring college football playoff teams. Georgia will be number 1. Spoiler alert, Georgia will be number 1. We're going to do that ranking next week. So Georgia's different. The path is different. All those things favor Kirby Smart as if they needed any help at all. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.